All right, let's begin. Okay, with the Eibishter's help, today's daf is daf Chov Daled. We're going to start over here, daf Chov Gimel Amid Beis, by the Mishnah. The Mishnah begins, HaKoire Bat Torah, someone who reads, when they read the Torah in shul. So anybody who's called up for an aliyah, lo yivchos mishaloisha psukim, should not have less than 3 psukim. That means he has to read 3 psukim. Again, in the time of the Mishnah, the person who was called up to the Torah had to read the psukim. So you had to be prepared. So he had to read 3 psukim. The translator should not translate only one pasuk at a time. In other words, as soon as the reader says one pasuk, the translator translates that one pasuk. He reads the second pasuk, and then the meturgeman says the second pasuk. The reason is because if you read 3 psukim at a time, and then the translator has to translate it, it's going to get very confusing. So he translated, and people need to understand the Torah. That's what the point of the translation is. So therefore, it's important that he only translates one pasuk at a time. The Mishnah continues, Daf Chaf Dalet, Uvanavi Shloisha. When they're doing the mafter, they could read 3 psukim and translate 3 psukim at a time. Why? Because even if the listener doesn't fully comprehend what's being said, because it gets confused when you translate so much in one shot, there's no big halacha that you're learning from these psukim, from these navi. So therefore, it doesn't make a difference. So navi, the translator can do 3 at a time. But let's say all 3, the 3 parts of navi, there's 3 psukim, and each pasuk is another topic. That happens. Each pasuk is another topic. Then even a navi, karin echad echad, you translate 1 at a time. Then the Mishnah says, midalgin benavi, you can skip. Let's say you start the mafter, and you need to turn and skip a little bit. You're allowed to do that and mish by navi. Ve'ein medalge b'Torah, but you don't skip around when you're reading the Torah by no kriya. Now this right away should blurt out at you that really we do, because when we read the tainus on a tainus, read Vayichal Moshe, and then the pasuk, the next aliyah is Psal Lecha. You have to turn, if you ever got an aliyah, or you know what's going on, or if you're laying, you have to turn the Sefer Torah a little bit further. You skip around. So what does the Mishnah mean? You don't skip in Torah. You don't skip. Whatever you read, you have to read in order. So, and then the Mishnah says, we'll get back to discussing that in the Gemara. Bat Kamu Medalik, how much, even in Navi, if you're allowed to skip, let's say from chapter 5 in Shoftim to chapter 7, you're allowed to skip, but remember, don't make the skip too long. Ad Kedei Shelo Yifsek HaMeturgemin. Don't do it so that the meturgemin stop talking and the translator stop talking, and you're still twisting, finding the place, because that's not covered at Tzibur. That's very important. It's not covered an honor for the Tzibur as somebody's turning and finding the place. You know how you don't like a speaker that's not prepared. So therefore, even if we allowed you to skip a Navi, it's only a short skip, but not a long skip where it'll take time for you to skip to another part of the Navi, which during that time, the translator already stopped translating and everybody's silent as you're turning. The Gemara, we'll discuss all this in the Gemara. Hani Gimel Psukim Keneged. Why do we read 3 psukim for every aliyah? Amar Rabasi says Keneged Torah Neviim Uksuvim. It corresponds to Torah Neviim Uksuvim. That there's 3 parts to Torah, and therefore we want every aliyah should read 3 psukim, the corresponding Torah Neviim Uksuvim. V'lo yikra lemeturgam yosim pasuk echad. You shouldn't translate it more than 1 pasuk at a time, because again, if you translate more than 1 pasuk at a time, you get confused. Uvanavi gimel psukim. By navi, you're allowed to translate 3 psukim at a time. V'im hoya shlosh and shalish parshas. And as we said in the Mishnah, let's say you find a navi that has 3 topics and 3 psukim. Karin echad echad. Then you translate 1 at a time. You can't translate 3 psukim at once. Kegoin, for example, The maftir for Parsha Shoftim is in Yeshaya, and there are 3 psukim, one after another, that talk about Koyam Hashem, Chinam Nimkartim. That's pasuk 1. Koyam Hashem, so says Hashem, Elikim Mitzrayim Yored Ami Barishayna. Now that's pasuk number 2. And then there's a third pasuk that's another statement from Hashem, Mali Poi Num Hashem. So these 3 psukim have a different message from Hashem. And therefore, the 3 psukim that go one after another, when they translate those psukim, the translator should translate them one at a time, because they have 3 different ideas in those 3 psukim. So the Gemara says, Medalgim and Navi, we're allowed to skip in Navi. We're allowed to make a maftir. They can make a maftir, let's say, in 2 parts of Shoftim. In the beginning of Shoftim and then somewhere in the middle of Shoftim. Fine. But anytime the Chazal set up a reading of the Torah, you're not allowed to skip. It has to be 1 parsha at a time. So the Gemara asks the question, Raminu, I'll ask you a contradiction. We learned in Masechta Yuma that the Kohen Gadol would read the parsha in front of everybody of what the service he did. Korei achrei mois, he would read parshas achrei mois, va'ach be'asar, and he would read parshas emor. Right? He would turn the Torah and read in parshas emor. So wait a second. V'hokamadalik, he was moving the Sefer Torah around. You just told me that in Sefer Torah you're not allowed to move it around. You're not allowed to skip. And here, part of the service was that they read achrei mos, and then they continued on in parshas emor on Yom Kippur. Amar Abai says, Loi kasha. I agree. When you read the Torah, you could skip around, but it has to be in one topic. Achrei Mos talks about Yom Kippur, and in Parshas Emor, it tells you you're not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur. So there's one topic. First of all, no, that's the final teretz. But the Gemara tries to answer and says, Loi kasha kam b'deish yifsek kamaturgamim, kam kadesh lo yifsek kamaturgamim. There's no difficulty, because there it's talking about you're delaying it so much that the translator stopped talking. And over here is when the translator did not stop talking. That's not true. This is the kasha. The question is, what the Gemara just established is that from our Mishnah, it seems to imply that when you're reading the Torah, you're never allowed to skip. And here, in this Brisa Raminu, Kari Achrei Mois and Ach Ba'asar, they allowed you to skip. Elo Amar Abai said like this. Loi Kash, it's not difficult. Kan be'inyan echad. If it's one topic, you're allowed to skip around in the Torah. In other words, the first Aliyah read Achrei Mos, second Aliyah read, let's say, Parshas Emor. Fine, because it's one topic talking about Yom Kippur. And if you recall, again, by Tainus Tzibur, we read Vayechal, and then you may not notice, but they move the Sefer Torah a little bit to read Psalacha, the next Aliyah, which is a little further in Parshas Kisisa. So in Torah, you're allowed to do that. When do we say Torah you're not allowed to skip? In our Mishnah, is B'shtei Inyanos. If it's talking about 2 different topics. In 2 different topics of Torah, you're not allowed to skip around. Again, because it gets confusing. But Tanya, as we learned in a Braisa, Metalgim b'Torah be'inyan echad. If it's one topic, you're allowed to skip in Torah. Ubenavi b'shnei inyanim. And with Navi, you're allowed to skip with 2 topics. Kad v'kav, but remember, when you're skipping around, b'chadei shalifse katurgmim, make sure that you're not mixing, you're not turning the Sefer Torah after the translator stopped talking. This was so important to Chazal, that it shouldn't be a time when nobody's doing anything, and they're upstairs, they're up by the beamers trying to twirl the Sefer Torah to get to the right place. That is not respectful for the tzibor. And therefore, in fact, the Kohen Gadol read one part of the service in Parshas Pinchas, which talks about the Musaf of Yom Kippur. He read it by heart, because again, if he read it from the same Sefer Torah, it would take time till he got to the right place, and that's not respectful for the tzibur that they're waiting you while you're finding the place. Tanya Idach, we learned in another brayso, Ein medalgim menavi lenavi. You're not allowed to skip from one navi to a navi. Let's say you make a haftorah. You could say the first part of the haftorah is in Shoftim, the second part is in Shmuel. You can't do that. But uvnavi shel shnei masar, The Benavi of Treyasar, which is small little books and usually written on one cloth, midaleg, you're allowed to skip, right? Like for Hashaya to almost, whenever you're skipping and making a haftorah, you shouldn't start from the one that ends the book and turn it back to the beginning of the book. You have to somewhat go in order of the way it's written. First, what was written first, and then do what was written second. Okay, so that's what we learned over here. And we learned 2 points over here. One point is that you shouldn't when you're translating the Torah, make sure you translate one pasuk at a time. Don't confuse people by translating 2 psukim at a time. It's too much information to absorb. A Navi, it doesn't matter because there's not much mitzvahs in the Navi. But in the Torah, the translated one pasuk at a time. And another important point that you learned over here, that it's not respectful for the tzibur to sit around and wait while you're turning the Torah. And that's not respectful. Therefore, you're not allowed to switch the Torah if it's going to cause a delay when people are not doing anything.
Bernard, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Apropos to that, again, I may be confused here, but I know that, now we take out sometimes, let's say it's Yom Tov or something, we take out 2 or 3 Torahs.
Right.
So we use one Torah, then go to the next Torah. But I guess, probably 1,000 years ago, they probably just had one Torah.
Right.
And they used to go to that part, like Shabbos, Hanukkah. You have different topics. Right. And they would go to skip around. What about that?
Right. So that's a good question. How did it work in the time of the Chazal?
Yeah.
That's a good question. Maybe you're right. Maybe they read it by heart. We saw that the Kohen Gadol read something by heart because it would take too long to get to the right place. So he'd read, let's say, Achrei Mos, which is in Vayikra, and then Parshas Emor. And then if I remember, he closed the book and he started reading Parshas. He would say, I'm reading this by heart because I don't want you to delay. So maybe in those cases, maybe at Hanukkah, and they only had one Torah, they used to read by heart. Nowadays, I think people are, I guess, have more patience, or it's understandable, or they move it.
Yeah, but also I remember I was a gabbai, so it's already prepared. It's already rolled to the part where you have. So it's really a matter of basically just do Hagba and go to the next one, and you open up the Torah. But I thought, is it the delay or the delay plus the topics? Also, you're not allowed to change topics, you said.
Right. Because in the Torah, the idea is that if you stay on one topic, you know how when you listen to a speaker and he has 4 different topics, you can't follow.
That's
you have
correct.
to stay with one theme. So Rashi calls it terif hadas, which is your mind gets scrambled, basically, when there's too much inyanim. So with Torah, we have to be very careful that people get the message and the information clearly.
Right.
Yeah.
So Shabbos, Hanukkah, when you have different topics, maybe the fact is that, Shabbos, what the parsha is all about. We've been doing it for a good part of your life. And you know what Hanukkah is? Maybe it's related to the fact that you already know Shabbos already is like, you know the parsha already, and Hanukkah is not really different either because you kind of used to it. Maybe they're talking about maybe going from let's say a Shabbos Rosh Chodesh where you do the parsha and a Rosh Chodesh. I don't know. I'm kind of confused. I don't know exactly what they mean.
I think your question is a good one. What happened in the time of this Gemara when they had only one Sefer Torah and there was Shabbos Hanukkah? They and they had one Sefer Torah? According to the way the Gemara reads, you're not supposed to skip because they're 2 different topics. One's the Nisim. It's not talking about Hanukkah. It's talking about Nisim. Right. One is Parshas Hashavua, Parshas Mikei.
Right.
And my guess is that they would, according to the way the Gemara is reading, you should read that by heart. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's very interesting. The Mishnah says, Hamafti Benovi. Usually the guy that got mafter, he was you see, not everybody knew how to read. So you have to take the background here. So they had 7 guys in the shul that knew how to read. And the 8th guy who knew how to read, nobody else knew how to read. He was called the mafter. And every Shabbos, he got a mafter. So he was the mafter Benovi. So because it's such a shvacha it's such a weak type of kibud. It's not really an aliyah. It's not counted as one of the 7. So the Mishnah says, "Who Paris al Shema?" Paris al Shema would mean like this: that in case 10 people come late to shul, let's say 10 people come late to shul, and they need somebody to do Baruch Hu, and they would say Baruch Hu together, and then that guy who said Baruch Hu would say the bracha of Yotze Or Uvarei Choshech out loud, and then he would say Yotze Am Oris. They would answer Amen. And the idea was to give everybody the opportunity who came late to shul to say Baruch Es Hashem HaMavorach. Then they would skip Ahava Rabbah and Kriya Shema. You could say that on your own whenever you want. He would right away start Shemini Esrei, and then he would do Kedusha. So even if you came late, you already got Kedusha, and you got a Baruch Hu. So the guy that's Mr. Maftir, because we know he's always getting the weakest kibud, so to speak, and he must have been, it's a thankless because he taught himself how to read. So we give him the opportunity, is Hu Paris al Shema. He will do the Baruch Hu if people come late. And if people come late, we give him the honor to be the Shliach Tzibur to say Kedusha. And who knows this kapov, this is crossed out. Okay, this is not part of the Mishnah according to some. Let's say the guy that reads the Navi, nobody else knows how to read, knows how to do the maftir, except there's this young boy that knows how to do it. Then his father or his teacher, they're the ones that are Peiros al Shema. They take those honors on his behalf. And Oiver Lifnei Ateva. Then the Mishnah says, Katan Kore Batoira Umatargeb. A Katan could get an aliyah and be the translator, but he cannot be the Shliach Tzibur. Aval Eina Peiros al Shema. He cannot be a Shliach Tzibur saying Baruch Hashem Vayrach. The Eina Oiver Lifnei Ateva. He cannot do Chazaras Hashatz. The Eina Noise is Kappa, and he's not allowed to do duchening. Tosfos already points out a katan doesn't do duchening when it's not respectful if the only one that's doing duchening is a katan. That means that the whole tzibur is expecting a bracha from this minor up there. But if there are other kahanim giving a bracha, like you see, then they bring a katan to go up there. But that's what we say. Then the Mishnah says, what happens? You have a poicheach. Poicheach is somebody who's wearing shorts and no socks and no shoes. So he doesn't look respectful. He has torn clothing. Peiros Shema umatargem. He can be a translator or say the Baruch Hu. He cannot be the reader of the Torah because he's not dressed respectfully. And he cannot be the Shlich Tzibur if he's wearing shorts and no shoes. The Eina Noise is Kapov, and he cannot be duchening. The reason is it's not respectful for the tzibur if the guy that's up there leading the tzibur is not dressed appropriately. Suma, let's say somebody's blind. Can he be the leader in saying Yotze Or, God created light, fashioned light, and created darkness? So the Mishnah says, even though he's blind and never benefited from light, Peiros Shema u'metargem. He can be Peiros Shema. He can lead the Baruch Hu and say Yotze Or Uvarei Choshech and be mitzi everybody in that bracha. Targem, and he can be a translator. Obviously, he can't read the Torah because he's not seeing what he's reading, but that's the things that he can do. Rabbi Yehuda says, how could you make the bracha of Yotze Or? Kol shaloi ra ma'oris miyamav. Anybody who is blind from birth, never saw light in his life, Eina Peiros Shema. He cannot be the leader in saying the bracha of Yotze Or Uvarei Choshech. So the Gemara asks the following question: my timer, what's the reason why the person that got mafter, we give him other honors? And today we have a sense of the same thing. The guy that gets the mafter usually davens musaf. Why is it so? So Rapapa Amma Mishum Kavod. Since we want to give him honor, because since he's the mafter and he's always getting the lowest honor, so we want to combine it with other honors. So it's a more of a respectable job. Rabba Bar Shimi Amar Mishum de Asi Lin Nitsuye. It'll come to a fight. What will become to a fight? Usually in the time of the Gemara, they paid the guy that daven musaf. So therefore, they paid the guy that was for the shliach tzibor. So therefore, if a person worked so hard to know how to read and read the maftir, and somebody else gets the job and gets paid for it, davening for the Yomid, that's a fight. He worked much harder to learn how to read in the klaf, on the without reading the maftir, and saying, so therefore we give the guy that read the maftir, we allowed him to be the shliach tzibor. My benai, what would be the difference between the two reasons? Very simple. If they don't pay the chazan, if they don't pay the chazan doesn't get paid. So it's no fight, because the maftir doesn't want it, because he's not benefiting from it. He won't get paid for it. But if it's just the reason that you give him to daven for the Yomid is because of honor, we still want to honor him by giving the opportunity to lead the tzibor as the chazan. Now we learned in our Mishnah, if the guy that reads the maftir is always a young boy, so they're the ones, his father or teacher, they're the ones that daven for the Yomid. If you say it's because of a fight, that's why you let the guy daven for the Yomid. So why? Cotton Barnit Suyehu. Would the minor fight for the Yomid? He's not a fighter. He's not going to be disrespectful to the adults. He's going to let them daven. So why should the Cotton's father take his place and daven for the Yomid? Elamai, so the Gemara asks back, Mishum Kovid, it's the whole reason why we're doing this is to give him an extra honor and like a thank you, that you are the maftir, so we're thanking you and letting you daven for the Yomid. And since you're a minor, you can't daven for the Yomid, so we let your father do it. Cotton bar covered, who does a cotton need the honor? He's so happy to be part of the service. He doesn't mind doing the maftir, even if you gave him nothing, no honor after it. Ella, the reason why we give it, fascinating thing. The cotton that was the maftir, and he worked very hard to know how to read the maftir, and his parents worked hard to teach, or his teacher. We want to thank you to the parents. So Ika Kovid Aviv Kovid Rabbi. There's a thank you goes to the father or his teacher. And that's why we give them the honor to daven for the Yomid. Hacha Nami. So also, you could say also, if we didn't give them the honor, Ika Netsuya Aviv Netsuya Rabbi, then the father and the teacher will get into a fight with the other members of the shul. I worked so hard to teach my son to do the maftir. He did the maftir, and somebody else gets the opportunity to daven for the Yomid and get paid for it. I want to get paid for it. I could use the extra money. Therefore, both reasons apply, and that's why the katan, the person that gets the maftir, should we give him extra special honors and what like. The Mishnah, Ram Ahmed Beis, Peiris al Shema, a guy who's not wearing shorts, he can lead the tzibor on Peiris Chashman and etc. Katan. Very good, interesting question. You told me that you could call a katan up to the Torah. From the Mishnah, you call a katan up to the Torah. Fine. What happens if the katan is wearing shorts and no socks? A man that's wearing no shorts and no socks, I understand, because the pasuk says, ervas davar. So he shouldn't dress disrespectfully. But a katan is not commanded with that lav. He shouldn't see an erva, shouldn't have something that's normally covered. Or maybe there's no difference. Cotton or a gadol, if you're not dressed appropriately, you shouldn't get an aliyah. Amalei, so Abaya answered, Ula, b'tibaylach aram. Why don't you ask the question, can a cotton walk up to the Sefer Torah without wearing any clothing? So aram my tamaloi, what's the reason why you said, you didn't even have that question. If he's naked, why can't he go up for the liyah? We shouldn't fight a tzibur. It's so disrespectful for the tzibur if a nude cotton goes up to get an aliyah. Hachanami, also over here, even if he's wearing a shorts and it's torn clothing without shoes and socks, mishum k'foid hatzibur, it's honor the tzibur, and it doesn't work. He should not get the aliyah. The Mishnah says, Suma Paras al Shema. A blind person can be mitzi the tzibur that don't know how to read by saying the bracha yoitza or uvarich. God creates light, even though he's blind. Tanya, we learned in the Brisa. Amrullah Rabbi Yehuda. They told Rabbi Yehuda, who said that a summa should not do this. Not everything, because it's understandable what Rabbi Yehuda said. He says that a blind person never saw light. What's he making a bracha for? So they told Rabbi Yehuda, many people look into Yecheskel, the Sefer Yecheskel, and read the whole the psukim about God's chariot. I mean, it's like very high, lofty ideas, and they never saw it in their life. So you can talk about things even though you never experienced it. So why can't the Summa make that bracha? And why does he need to experience it? Even if he doesn't experience, he could still make the bracha of Yitzhar. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda, what does Rabbi Yehuda do that? He says, Hassam, I understand by Sefer Yecheskel, it's basically, does your heart understand it? You try to understand it, and when you learn it, you try to understand it, fine. But Hacha over here, the whole point of making the bracha is that Mishum Hanahu, you're thanking God for the benefit that you have from light. But he has no benefit from light. So how can he make a bracha? And by extension, Rabbi Yehuda probably would hold that a blind person cannot make the bracha pekeach ivrim, that God gives sight in the morning, because he doesn't have sight. For Rabbanan, what do Rabbanan do? Islay hana. Even a blind person has hana, benefit from the light. Why? Rabbi Yosi, like the story of Rabbi Yosi. Tanya, we learned in the Brisa. Rabbi Yosi, Kol Yamai Hayosi Mitztayer Al Mikrozev Yosi. I had a problem with this pasuk. Pasuk talks about the curses and says, "Vayisha Mashris B'Tzarayim Kashi Mashmish or Iver Ba'Fela." You get the curses that are going to befall you if you don't listen to the Torah, and you'll be tapping around during noontime like a blind person in total darkness. That blind person in total darkness, what does that mean? If you're blind, what's the difference if it's total darkness or light? You can't see it anyway. So Rabbi Yossi was wondering about that pasuk. He said, this story happened to me. One time, I was going and walking on a pitch black, dark night. And I saw a blind person. He was walking, and a torch in his hand. So I said, Beni, my son, why are you carrying a torch? Amali, so the blind person says, as long as the torch is in my hand, people will see me. They will save me from tripping, from falling into thorns, for falling into a pit. So all these things are not for me, no, but other people can see that I am here and warn me. So even a blind person benefits that other people can see and guide him. So hence, that's why Rabbanan, who held like Rabbi Yossi, held that a blind person can make the bracha yotzar uvarech choshech. Now the Mishnah discusses two more things. Kohen sheyesh biyad of mumin lo yisas kappa. A kohen that has a blemish on his hand that causes. Now imagine they used to the duchen with no talus over their hands, and the shechina rests by the kohen's hands. So what the Mishnah is saying is that if a kohen has blemishes by his hands, causing people to stare at his hands, lo yisas kappa, he should not do duchening, because people are going to stare at his hands, and they're staring at the place where God's presence is. Rabbi Yehuda says, Af mi shahaya yadav tzluis satis, if your hands are colored red or blue, lo yisas kapov, you shouldn't again do duchening. The whole reason for both of these things is people will stare there, and they're looking at you, and that's the place where the Shekhinah is resting. Tana, we learned in the Brisa. Mumim she'amru, what kind of blemishes that we say a kohen should not duchen if he has these blemishes? It doesn't necessarily have to be on his hands. Befonov on his face, Yodov on his feet, Raglov on his Yodov on his hands, Raglov on his feet. Anything that causes you not to look into your siddur, but actually like observe the person that's benching you, then he should not duchen, because he's causing people to look where the Shechina is. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Yoda boy hakonis, if the kohen has blotches on his hands, lo yises kapav, you should not duch him. Tanyanami Hacha, we also learned the same thing. Yada by Hakoniyos, Loisa Kapov, Akumais. If his hand is twisted, Akushas are turned over. So he has a funny shaped hand. Loisa Kapov. Because again, this causes people to look at it. Now the Gemara says something different. Amar of Asi, Chaifani, a person from Haifa, lo yisas kapov. Guy comes from the city of Haifa, he should not be a duchni. Now, what's wrong with coming from the city of Haifa? Tanya Nami Hachi. So the Gemara is going to explain. Ei maridin lifnei ateva. You can't daven for the Yomid. Loy anshe Beit Sha'an, loy anshe Beis Haifa. People who are from Bet Shan or Bet Haifa, loy anshe Tiv Oinin. All these people have a certain manner of talking, which is not precise. Because, fascinating, we don't even recognize it, but if you're Sfardi, you know that there's a difference between the Aleph and the Ayin. Ayin is more pronounced and Aleph is softer. And therefore, these people, the Aleph and the Ayin sound alike. So therefore, they confuse the two. So it could come out when they're duchening, they'll say, Yo'er Hashem Panavei Lecha. And instead of saying Yo'er, Hashem should enlighten his presence to you. Yo'er means to arouse his anger to you. With Yo'er, with an ayin, stands to arouse anger. So they shouldn't be duchening because they don't know how to pronounce words. That's what the Gemara is basically talking about over here. Amalei Rab Chiya, Rab Shimon Rabbi. Rab Chiya said to Rab Shimon Rabbi. We had this many times. Rab Chiya was a tutor to Rab Shimon, the son of Rabbeinu HaKadosh. So he told Rab Shimon, Ilimole ata Levi, if you would have been a Levi, pasal ata min haduchen, you would not be allowed to sing in the Beis HaMikdash. Mishum the avei kolach, because you have too thick of a voice and it's not pleasant to listen to. Asa amalu lavu. So Rab Shimon told his father that my tutor, Rab Chiya, told me I can't be into the Beis HaMikdash's choir. Amalei, so Rabbi said, Zil Amalei, go tell him, Kishmagia Eitzel v'chikisi Lashem, loy nimsus mecharif megadev, when he reaches the pasuk v'chikisi Lashem, I hope to God. And Rab Chiya had a problem saying the words ches with a hey. He couldn't say the word ches, so it sounded v'chikisi Lashem. I will smack, so to speak, God, when he pronounced it. So he said, if you would say that, you would be somebody who's blaspheming God. So he was saying, you're pointing out my son's thick voice, you have a pronunciation problem. Very interesting how, unfortunately, you don't realize that it's how important it is to daven precisely and with meticulously pronouncing the words. People don't realize that until, unfortunately, when they're in Avel and they have to daven for the Amid, and it's hard to listen to them when they're mispronouncing words. It's
people can hear what.
A Mensch soll kennen davenen zogen the Werte also geht. As a Mensch is as a gippet durch the davening is nicht
redt nicht aus der Werte.
Redt nicht aus der Werte. This is nicht geht. And as a Schlich Zibber. Was?
Darf man nicht davenen.
Ja, aber ja. Der Tate ist gemacht im Oval, nicht kann Chasen.
Yeah.
Right. Omer Avhona, Zavlagon, Laises Kapov. A Zavlagon, so not a guy who has freckles. He has also like sunspots. He shouldn't do duchning. Says the Gemara, Vahu dahave b'shavis drafuna v'abaparis yadei, and he was doing the duchning. If he was in the neighborhood of Rav Huna, and for the Gemara, who dash be'irei have, everybody knew how his hands looked. So if everybody was used to it already, then they allowed him to do duchening. So we qualified that if a person has a mum, he should not be the davener. But if everybody knows his blemish already, so no one's going to steer when he's doing the duchening, that's good enough. Everybody knows his blemish, mutter. A guy is blind in one eye, lo yises kapov. He should not do the duchening. There was a person in Rabbi Yochanan's shul, who was a blind in one eye, to have a paras yadei, and Rabbi Yochanan allowed him to be the kohen to do duchening. And for the Gemara, who dash be'irahava, Everybody knew him, so he wasn't so strange. Nobody had a problem staring at him. Tanya nami hachi. Suma ba'achas me'enav li'yisas kapav imhayadash be'iroi mutar. If everybody knows about it, it's mutar. Rabbi Yehuda oimem misha hayadav tzvuyis li'yisas kapav. If you have paint on your hand, you should not do duchening. Tana, we learned in a brayse. If you have most of the people in the city are painters, so it's not strange to see a person with black paint on his hand. Then you're mutter to do duchening because it's not going to cause excessive staring. One more Mishnah. A man who says, I'm not going to be the chazan if I have to wear colored clothing. He only wants to wear white. Well, wearing white is something of what the Christians do, the Talmidei Yeshi. They're called minim. So then, even if he changes his mind, he says, oh, I don't mind. I would wear clothing, colored clothing, but allow me to wear a white clothing. I regret what I said, lo yavar, because we're always concerned that he is a Christian. You'll see what the Mishnah says. A guy says, I'm not going with the shoes on. I'm never going with shoes to daven for the Amid. And then he changes his mind. Even if he says, that barefoot, we don't allow him to do that. If a person makes his tefillin in the shape of a walnut, like a walnut. Sakana, not only if you make the tefillin your tefillin shel rosh in the shape of a walnut, not only you're not yotze because it's supposed to be squared, but sakana the ein ba mitzvah. It's a dangerous thing because you can bang your head, and since it's like in the shape of a walnut and it comes to a point, and this usually is the softest part of your head, it could go through and puncture your skull. Nasna al mitzvah, if you put your tefillin on the forehead, pas yodai, or on your arm, right? You put it into your hand. The Torah says, kshartem lois al yadecha, so you put your tefillin shayad in your hand. And you put it between your eyes. All these things are the minas, are the Christians, which they translated the Torah verbatim, and they didn't believe in Chazal. Tzipon zahav, a man who covers his tefillin with gold, or he puts the tefillin shayad on his shirt sleeve. This is somebody who's an Amaretz, or somebody he's on the outer fringes of the religion. He's not a Christian, he's not a min, but he's from the outer parts of the religion. He thinks he's doing something nice. He's covering it with gold. What could be so nice? Or he wants to show everybody he's wearing tefillin shel yad, so he puts it onto his shirt sleeve. It's not considered a hefsek, so to speak. So, but he wants to show, but the tefillin shel yad has to be underneath your shirt sleeve because it's la'oy chol la'ois. So, my Tama, again, the Gemara says, what's the reason why, if you say you only want to wear white, what's the reason, what's wrong with that? Chayshinin shema minas nizrukaboy. We're cautious that maybe he's joining the sect of minas of Christianity. Ha'oisa tfilasai agula sakana ve'imba mitzvah. You make your tefillin round, it's a danger and you don't get a mitzvah. Lema, let us say the reason why it's a problem is the Tanina Lahadu Tanarabonim. This is what the Mishnah is trying to teach us. Tefillin murabais halacha l'mayshim sinai. Tefillin have to be square. That's halacha l'mayshim sinai. Va'amarava b'tifron of a lachsainon. You have to make sure it's square, perfect square, and the diagonal is like a perfect diagonal. In other words, the diagonal is 2/5 bigger than each of the sides. But that's the reason why a tefillin that's round is no good. So maybe our Mishnah is, that's what the Mishnah is trying to teach you. So the Gemara says, no, it's not true. Maybe our Mishnah would hold you can make a tefillin in the shape of an egg or in the shape of a perfect circle or oval shape. That's fine. Bas Nisan, but our Mishnah had the problem, Davide ka'amguza. You made it like amguza, like an egois, like a walnut. So it has protrusions. It's not smooth. It comes to a point, so it could damage your head. But if you make it round, or if you make it like an egg or a bean, maybe that's okay according to our Mishnah. But the halacha is the same thing. that if you make a tefillin like an egg or a bean, it's no good, and of course, it's also a sakana. Fine. This ends Daf Chof Daled.
I heard that they, I'm not sure it was in Israel, but they did the excavation. I think they found pairs of tefillin. They're very, very tiny, very tiny. And I think some of them were roundish. I'm not sure if they were like in a walnut, but rounded
Right.
the edges. So I guess that was permitted, but it had to be specifically details that it shouldn't be a sakana.
Right. I get it because this is we're learning the history of what was going on as they were creating new fringe groups, breaking away from the Chazal.
I definitely actually I remember distinctly. Must have been 20 years ago. We went away with a program, and we were in a hotel, and it was mostly and there were some people there that were from this crazy person who called himself a rabbi, that were all part of like doing Kabbalah. And you could see people were definitely, some of them not Jewish, and it was during the Yom Tovim, and they were all wearing white.
Yeah,
every one of them. It was like a cult,
right?
And I didn't understand why, but maybe there's something behind that. Maybe there was something they did it. Maybe because they heard that Yoshke, whatever it is, was doing that. I don't know.
I just want to tell you that the word mean means one type. The essence of Christianity is to say all humans are the same, like liberalism. Everybody is the same. And that was the basis of like, wow, it attracted people because, there's no discrimination, so to speak, like we have in Judaism, like, caste system, Kohen, Levi, Yisrael, we're all the same.
Right. Yeah.
Baruch, you said that it's disrespectful to keep the Shliach Tzibur waiting while you roll up the Torah, but sometimes you take out 3 Torahs, and it happens all the time. They're looking for the place in the second Torah, and then the Shliach Tzibur is waiting.
Yeah, I know. It's not right. That's blame the Gabbai, but it's not. It's Shloi Keneged Halacha. That's not the Halacha.
All right.
Yeah. Very good.
All right. Very good. Good enough.
Good enough.